Hi, I'm Jessica Durrant and I am a fashion and beauty illustrator. My work is inspired by my travels around the globe, Japanese, French, and Scandinavian design, as well as my life itself. In this next tutorial, we're going to be focusing on showing you the wet-on-wet watercolor technique, which is one of my favorite techniques that I use almost every day in my illustrations. I've decided that I want to use the two papers just so that we can kind of see in real time how differently the water and the color reacts to when you put it down on paper. I'm going to be using the acrylic inks as well as the concentrated radiant inks. I'm going to grab my larger Angle Bright wash brush and I'm just going to dip it in water to get it prepped and ready for getting the paint on the paper. This is the wet-on-wet technique, which you may have seen before, but if you're not familiar with the wet-on-wet technique, it's basically you're wetting your paper or you're using a wet product, and then you're going to be adding another layer of wetness with your paint. I'm just gonna start by quickly washing some water onto my paper. Now it's primed and ready. We could just drop from the dropper too. This beautiful iris blue, you're gonna see the pigment quality very quickly. You see how it moves and bleeds, and as it bleeds out, the color starts to slowly gradate and you almost get an ombre-like effect. If you decide you wanna put another color next to it and create a little bit more interest, I have found with the radiant concentrated inks, the color stays pretty powerful. You might get some bleeding, but you can see where we've put the color has stayed pretty concentrated. Where it's bled out with the water, it's starting to change. Some of these colors, they get more beautiful as they dry, and you might even see different colors in them by the time they're dry. You might see more yellow or more blue, but we're just kind of testing the paper. We're testing the color. You could essentially just make your own little abstract painting here. So here we have the Arches paper, and this is the cold press paper, I believe, and it's got even more texture to it. It has a completely different grain to it. This is accepting the water very differently. Let's just pull a different color here. At least right now, the edges are drying differently than the edges here. So there is a very different level of bleeding happening here. But I want to try the acrylic inks so you can kind of see the difference. Let me just kind of make sure my paper is nice and wet here. Give this a good shake because a lot of times the color will kind of travel to the bottom. Let's see how this blue goes down. And that flowed differently. This one's drying a little bit more, kind of like that one there. And you can see the pigment quality is very strong. Let's try the red. Now, the acrylic ink, I will say, is a little bit less translucent than these. So that would be a little bit of the difference that I'm seeing there. Do you have a preference? Is the paper buckling more? Do I like this grain more than I like this grain? The other big part of the equation, and it's a very common question I get asked, is how do you control your paints? And that's really something that you learn by practicing. Take this as a really fun way to introduce yourself to the inks, and do not waste this paper. I think it's just important to be mindful of not wasting our materials and using everything that we have. We're gonna prep the brush with just a little bit of water to get it open and ready for accepting color. And I'm gonna go ahead and put these colors on my palette. And I think for this practice, it's good to only stick to maybe 2, 3 colors at most. What you're gonna do is just maybe pull in a little bit of color into that water and dilute it just a little. I just wanna practice by making one petal stroke here. So let's just pretend we're painting one petal. Very easy in this color. Now that you've seen the wet on wet technique, you see it's still glossy, the paper, it's ready to accept what you add to it. So maybe I'm just gonna come in with a little bit of the mahogany, and you can see how much paint I put in, and if I wanna just keep adding a little bit more and letting it fan out and bleed, you're gonna see that you're gonna get so many different variations by first putting down a color that you've mixed and then adding another color. By the time this finishes drying, we're gonna see not just the brown, but we're gonna see kind of like a lavenderish gray color as well as the pink. We're gonna play with making some poppies, and poppies are a very easy shape to create. We're just gonna create that shape that you see in a poppy, right? Let it dry for not too long. I want it to go in and just bleed out a little bit so that we get the emphasis of the inside of the flower being dark and concentrated, and then it bleeds out naturally. What I like to do is just start painting a bunch, like create a pattern of flowers and then go by each one and start dropping in color and seeing how things change based on when you put them down and when you start adding color, at what time. I'm gonna take the Tahiti red, and I wanna see what this looks like just in the middle of some of these. You could even say, I want to drop this one in. Another thing you can do is, if you want to wait for these to dry, you can come back in with a detail brush and you can create more stems and lines, and it will make the poppy have more of a 3D effect. I hope these exercises will help you, so please join me in my watercolor fashion illustration course with Domestika. Click the link in the description below.